Luminary is not my favorite Guardian spec, that much is for sure, but I think it's actually underrated. Why is that? So before I jump into my detailed analysis of why I actually think Luminary might actually better than a lot of people think, I want to mention I have different kinds of videos for all the elite specs that we were able to test in the beta event, so be sure to check those out. Link is in the description down below. And of course, as always, let me know your takes on Luminary in the comments down below as well. Special shout out to all my dear supporters on YouTube, Twitch and Patreon that help me keep the lights on. And now without much further ado, let's jump straight in. So let's start with the profession mechanic. I personally think the profession mechanic is not the most intriguing one. Why is that? Because I think the problem is that it's just an F4 and it doesn't give you some kind of real shroud. Yes, it alters your attacks, but depending on the build that you play, you really just want to dip in, use your hammer for example if you get a lot of damage buffs, and then go back out. Maybe use the 3 skill as well to get a symbol, but that's about it. And I feel like this is a weird playstyle. That's not something that I actually think is really good design-wise. Because yes, you get damage buff, you even get some kind of damage reduction buff and stuff like that. Yes, it's like gameplay-wise. And how strong it is, yes, I can see why this works. But I personally think it's better to have some altering mechanic of the core Guardian spec, not something that is a little bit on top and doesn't really change too much how you play, just have one more skill that you press every now and then. I think that's not perfect. So I think it would be cooler, and we will get to that depending on the build, that you stay in the shroud and actually use more skills, that you have a little bit more interesting gameplay loops because of that. And I also think it would be a little bit more, I think maybe the auto attack in shroud could get some kind of help, because it feels like interesting, yes, that you can change and alter how it actually functions, but it is almost never used. So I really think the profession mechanic is not like completely sold to me. I have to be honest there. Now let's talk a little bit about the utility skills. I think the utility skills are actually quite good. I like them. They are somewhat interesting design-wise, how they look. I think they are also quite interesting how they work, because they have some interesting ideas in there. So for example, that you get some nice barrier and get some nice damage on the same skill, that you have some interesting Condy cleanse there, you have some really interesting healing skill there, just popping the stance that gives you heal whenever you apply a boon to an ally. That's really strong. That's really, really strong. I personally liked it a lot, this design. And in general, I think the elite skill, it's really hard to run it in competitive modes, and in PvE, I'm not sure if that's always the most fun thing to use. I think it's always in the DPS builds, yes, but is it really like very important? I think the elite skill is like, it looks good, but I think the power level is not always like the skill that you would use, because Guardian actually has good elite skills. So we will see. But in general, I think it's actually interesting design-wise from the utility skills. Now let's talk a little bit about the builds. So let's start with PvE. I personally think the PvE builds are actually quite a widespread. I think some of them, like the power DPS build, reaches, I think at the moment like 48k, so it's really high for a power build, but I don't like it. I think the gameplay loop is like Power Guardian. It's like if you would play a core Power Guardian and you just dip in Shroud, like I just mentioned, every now and then. And I think that's not fun gameplay wise. I think the more support you put into Luminary, the more interesting the Shroud becomes. I really think so. Why is that? Because if you play, for example, a leg DPS or Luminary, you actually get more Shroud usage out and you have more resets on your virtual skills. So therefore you have a little bit more spammy gameplay. I think in general Luminary is quite spammy, but it gets a little bit more interesting because you stay in the Shroud more often. And I think that's something that I like. I like gameplay that actually interacts with the Luminary mechanic, or in general all the profession mechanics. I think that's why you choose a profession, to interact with the mechanic. If you ignore the mechanic, just take damage buffs and that's it, that's I think not a good design. And that's with elect DPS, it's a little bit better. And with heal elect in PvE, which is actually quite viable. I actually tested it. It's actually nice how much boons you can output. You can see it here in the background. It's actually very fun. I actually think Luminary as a healer is surprisingly fun. It might not be like dethroning Chronomancer or Troubadour, that much is pretty much a given, but I think it's still fun, has very good healing output that could easily outlast the extremely damaging field, as you can see in the background. I have very nice boon uptime and have still the good core Guardian utility skills that I can exchange for whatever I want. So for example, I can bring a lot of CC with Sanctuary. I can even bring some kind of ranged revive with the Signet of Mercy. So there are actually quite a lot of flexibility in the baseline. I think healing Luminary looks actually quite good, at least in PvE. Now let's talk about the competitive modes, because I tested heal Luminary in PvP as well, and I can tell you it's not that good. It's just not that good. It's too slow. The thing is, the Shroud skills, that's another criticism that I have of the Shroud, is that they are very slow. In competitive modes where you don't have any quickness, you feel it a lot, but even in PvE with quickness, they sometimes feel a little bit too slow to use. And that's something that is very painful, especially on a healer in PvP, because you're just too slow to react in time. And I think that is better in PvP if you play a full DPS build or something, then it's actually quite fun to use. It is still, in my opinion, very close to Core Guardian, and you just play some kind of Core Guardian with a little bit of more utility in the Shroud. That's about it. I think the Bruiser build is actually quite fun. I like the idea of a Bruiser build Luminary in PvP, because you can actually use the Light Aura traits. I think this is really, the Light Aura traits are for me the only traits that are actually really cool and interesting. Really, like, very interesting, because you actually can craft the whole build around this gimmick. Is it working? Probably only in competitive modes to some extent, but also not like meta builds level. But okay, I actually think like in competitive modes, Luminary is actually quite decent. It might not be absolutely broken as other released elite specs, but still, I think it's actually quite fun to play, and I like it in competitive modes a little bit. But I think personally for me, it's too, like, the attacks are too slow. I think if they improve that, I actually would like it a lot. But I think if you compare to a Willbinder that is really fast-paced, this Luminary feels a little bit like, I don't know, taking 2 gears back or something like that. So yeah, I'm not completely convinced with it. And I also think Luminary in World vs. World is definitely worthwhile as some kind of bruisery roamer or some kind of aggressive roamer. I think that's definitely working. And the cool part is I think actually it's surprisingly good in a Zerg. Why is that? Because it has a lot of AoE utility skills that help. Not only the utility skills, but also the Shroud skills and stuff like that. There is actually a lot of value in there. Will it like be the best support? No. Will it be the best DPS? No. But it's definitely an option that you can play. I think it's definitely not something that you would never see in a Zerg, like a Daredevil or something. So I think it's in a decent spot. I think, like I said, the cast times on the Shrouds makes it in competitive modes a little bit lackluster. And I also think that in PvE, the usability of the Shroud is only really given in a healing build, and that's also something that they should improve on. But in general, I think how I see the Luminary now after testing it, I changed my opinion a little bit and said, okay, before I tested it, it looked a little bit dull. After I tested it, it feels like a Guardian spec that is not so much over the top like a Firebrand, where you have like insane amounts of difficulty learning it coming from a Core Guardian. I think Luminary is definitely a step taken back and saying, okay, this is something that is way closer to Core Guardian, which is not always a bad thing. It's easier to get into, in my opinion, and it's definitely sometimes the best choice for a new player or for someone that actually doesn't want to go full all in with like 3 different tomes with 5 weapon skills. So I think it has a place, and it's definitely worthwhile playing, and it feels not too bad, to be honest. I think it's actually quite fun to play, depending on the build, of course. Let me know your takes on Luminary. I personally think it's okay. It needs some help, but it's definitely fixable, and it's not as dull as other elite spec that we got with this expansion, in my opinion. And especially the power level for all the builds that you can run are actually is not bad in all game modes. It might not be for everyone, but that's okay. So, like I said, let me know your takes in the comments. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. And if you want to see all other reviews for the beta event, be sure to check out this playlist. Thanks again to all my supporters, and I hope to see you all in the next video.